The USS Connecticut holds the distinction of being the fourth ship to carry the name, as well as being the lead ship of her class of 6 battleships. She is most well known for being the flagship of the famed Great White Fleet, a group of 16 battleships meant to show the might of the American Navy and its blue water capabilities. The ship hulls were painted a striking white, the American Navy's peacetime color scheme, giving the Armada its distinct nickname. This worldwide cruise was also a way to allow the Navy to gain much-needed experience and implement improvements learned while at sea, including gunnery exercises, which increased the fleet's accuracy twofold. It also secretly was intended to help deter a potential war with Japan, which was threatened at the time. The USS Connecticut measured 139.1 meters long, with a beam of 23.4 meters and a draft of 7.5 meters, and at full load, she could displace nearly 18,000 long tons. The Connecticut was powered by 2-shaft triple expansion steam engines, rated at 16,500 horsepower, with the steam provided by 12 coal-fired Babcock & Wilcox boilers ducted into 3 funnels. The Connecticut was originally fitted with heavy military masts, but shortly after, those were replaced with the now distinct lattice masts. At launch, she carried a crew of 827 officers and sailors, with a later full complement totaling 896 officers and sailors. The Connecticut's armament consisted of a main battery of 4 12-inch Mark V guns in a twin gun turret setup on the ship's center line, with one forward and another aft for long-range combat. For close-range combat, the ship could defend itself from torpedo boats with its 20 3-inch guns mounted in along the side of the hull. She also featured 12 3-pounder guns and 4 37mm 1-pounder guns. Submerged in her hull on the broadside, she also carried 4 21-inch torpedo tubes. The ship was ordered on July 1st of 1902 and eventually laid down on March 10th of 1903. Her launch came on September 29th of 1904. A crowd of 30,000 people were stated to have attended the launch of the Connecticut. But the Connecticut's construction was not without several issues, most notably sabotage. In fact, 3 separate attempts were carried out to take out the Connecticut, with the first discovered by workers in March of 1904. Those working on the ship discovered that rivets on the keel plates were bored through in an attempt to later flood the ship while at sea. Later that September, only weeks away from launching, a 35mm bolt was found driven into the launching way. If not discovered, this lone bolt would have torn through the ship's hull during launch, potentially sinking her in the harbor. Most notably, and most worrisome, was a 25mm hole that was discovered drilled through a steel keel plate shortly after the Connecticut launched. Thankfully, the ship's watertight compartments and her pumping system prevented her from sinking on the day of her launch, and the problem was quickly repaired. It seemed that certain elements at the time did not want to see the USS Connecticut launch, and the Navy quickly acted on the attempted sabotage. On top of the Navy ordering armed guards be placed at the shipyard, it also created a special overnight watch run from a Navy tug, which was manned by a detachment of Marines, whose orders were to kill any person or persons that approached the ship without prior authorization. But even with all the issues, the Connecticut launched to much fanfare, but in reality was only about 50% complete. At launch, the ship was missing much of her upper works, most all of her protection, machinery, and her armament. It would take another 2 years before the Connecticut was officially commissioned, with Captain William Swift serving as her first captain. But his command would not last long. Early in January of 1907, the USS Connecticut ran full upon a reef while entering harbor at the Puerto Rican island of Culebra. The Navy did not acknowledge the incident, but after local reports reached the States, they did release a statement saying the ship had touched bottom, but that no damage was detected upon inspection. This was not the case, however, with an amended statement coming only a day later that stated the ship did suffer minor damage, but that all was well and that she had returned to her shakedown cruise. The real story, however, is much more damning, as the Connecticut suffered major damage that was enough to require a dry docking to fix. What's worse is that the accident happened in broad daylight on a course that was clearly marked by buoys. By March of that year, Captain William Swift was court-martialed for thorough negligence causing a vessel to run upon a rock and negligent of duty in regard to the above. Reports indicated that Swift acted against the advice of his navigator and ordered the ship to pass on the wrong side of a navigational buoy and caused it to strike a shoal. Other reports from the time state that Swift told the committee that the sun was in his eyes at the time of the accident. Swift was quickly sentenced to 1 year suspension from duty, but that was later reduced to only 9 months. Swift's career in the Navy would continue, however, but while he would eventually earn the rank of Rear Admiral in 1908, he would never again command a ship and would retire from active service shortly after his promotion. He would, however, continue to work as an advisor to Navy affairs for several more years before his death in 1919. Rear Admiral Robley D. Evans would then transfer his flag from the USS Maine to the USS Connecticut and lead the Great White Fleet. He served in this position for the initial leg of the journey, with visits to several South American countries, before relinquishing command after becoming bedridden and being in constant pain for some time. Rear Admiral Charles M. Thomas would then take command of the Connecticut and take over as fleet commander. A huge celebration for the fleet took place in San Francisco, with over 1 million people watching the massive 42-ship fleet sail into the bay. Rear Admiral Charles Stillman Speary would then take over the fleet and oversee ship refits before its next major leg of its journey. The eastern leg of the journey went without incident, with the fleet making several stops. Most notably was when the Connecticut and Illinois were diverted and dispatched to southern Italy on a humanitarian mission after an earthquake struck the area. Sailors from the ship rendered aid, unloaded supplies from a Navy supply ship, and took part in debris removal and rescue efforts. Admiral Speary received the personal thanks of King Victor Emmanuel III for his actions. After the tour concluded, and as the fleet headed for Gibraltar, a gathering of ships from several nations, including Great Britain, Imperial Russia, France, and the Netherlands, greeted the Connecticut and her fleet, with decks manned and horns blaring. After returning home, President Roosevelt boarded and gave a short speech saying, "You've done the trick. Other nations may do as you have done, but they'll follow you." After her great journey, the Connecticut would serve as flagship of the Atlantic Fleet. By the end of 1915, and after years of service, the Connecticut would be placed into the Atlantic Reserve Fleet. But this would not last long, as the breakout of World War I would see her recommissioning in late 1916, and she would be made the flagship of the 5th Battleship Division. At war's end, the ship was assigned to the Cruiser and Transport Force and made several runs to France in order to return troops home. The next several years, she would serve as primarily a training vessel for new sailors, as a transport for troops, and in a number of fleet events as part of her battleship squadron. Later, in 1921, the Connecticut would leave the East Coast for duty with the Pacific Fleet. While there, she would be designated the flagship of Pacific Fleet training. The USS Connecticut's time would come to an end after the Five-Power Treaty was signed in 1922, which set tonnage limits that the nations involved in agreed to. Her last voyage would take place on December 11th of 1922 to the Puget Sound Navy Yard. The Connecticut was officially decommissioned on March 1st of 1923. The USS Connecticut, the most advanced ship in the U.S. Navy at the time she was built, served with distinction for some 17 years. From leading the Great White Fleet and placing the U.S. Navy on the map as a naval power, to training the next generation of sailors, the USS Connecticut earns her place in naval history. Thank you for watching this episode of Ships of the Line. If you enjoyed what you saw, the best thing you can do to support the channel and help us grow is to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Until next time, remember, a good navy is not a provocation to war. It is the surest guarantee of peace.